My name's J.D. Miller, and this is an article I wrote called "Was Billy the Kid Ordinary?" I thought that would be an interesting thing to explore. So here's my take on it. Was Billy the Kid ordinary? I saw this question in the comment section, and does he deserve the fame he had? Well, here's how he got famous after his death. The name Billy the Kid had all but been forgotten until 1916, when Walter Noble Burns, a reporter, was sent to Columbus, New Mexico to report on Pancho Villa's raid there. Another interesting story. While having a drink at a saloon, he saw a big Colt hanging on the wall behind the bar. He asked the bartender, "What's the story on that old shooting iron?" The bartender told him it was the gun that had killed Billy the Kid. Burns then asked, "Who is Billy the Kid?" By the way, that gun sold for $6 million a couple of years ago. A few years later, Mr. Burns returned to New Mexico, drove out to Fort Sumter, and interviewed Pauletta Maxwell, Sally Chisholm, and others who had known the kid. He then wrote a book called The Saga of Billy the Kid. This book, more than any other, made the kid famous. A copy was even found in Bonnie and Clyde's car after their deaths. But even during his early life, he was known. His name was mentioned in newspapers as Kid Antrim as early as 1875-76. There is no doubt that it took a little bit of luck to bring Billy fame, but luck only comes to those who deserve it. After his capture at Stinking Springs, a reporter asked him, "Looks like you're getting pretty famous lately. What do you think about that?" The kid looked at him and said, "There's no money in it." If he only knew his photograph would sell for $2.3 million 130 years later. I've listened to Bob Bose Bell, editor of True West magazine, talk about these details, and I agree they're fascinating. Billy should have just held on to that photo for a little longer. He was also quoted saying, as people stared at him through the bars, "This is good. Maybe people will think I'm half human now. Because they thought me an animal before. Maybe they'll think of me as half human." One reporter wrote, "He did look human indeed. There was nothing very mannish about him. He had a smooth face like a schoolboy with traditional silky fuzz on his upper lip and clear blue eyes with a roguish snap about them." One of the central reasons for his popularity is that he wasn't a typical outlaw. He didn't rob banks or trains. He was well liked by most and was extremely charismatic. So to conclude, was Billy the Kid ordinary? Not a chance. A man does not reach that sort of... is that he wasn't a typical outlaw. He didn't rob banks or trains. He was well liked by most and was extremely charismatic. So to conclude, was Billy the Kid ordinary? Not a chance. A man does not reach that sort of fame. He has by being ordinary. Years later, George Coe said that Billy could take 2 Colt 6-shooters, one in each hand, cock both, and spin one gun forward and one gun backward. He would shoot moving targets, and he could pick a handkerchief off the ground from his horse at a gallop. He always rode the finest horses, and at the end of his life, his famous bay mare was legendary as being the fastest thing on 4 feet. Pauletta Maxwell, interviewed after his death, said the single picture we have of him doesn't do him justice. He was described as charming and handsome by men and women alike. Since this article was written, there was a new photograph found of Billy the Kid, and it came from Harvey Whitehill, the sheriff of Silver City, New Mexico, who was the first one to arrest Billy the Kid, and in an envelope that was typed on the outside, Silver City Jail or Grant County, New Mexico, it mentioned 3 items that were found on Billy the Kid, and it said there was one large German coin, 1 American dollar, and a self-likeness. And that picture, I believe, is correct. The escape that made him a legend. The Kid was a legend locally even when he was alive, especially after he escaped the jail in Lincoln 2 weeks before he was to be hanged. This was when he became the legend we know today. I'm going to enclose the story of his escape here because I believe it's central in helping the reader to see the event that propelled the Kid into legend. The single most important event that cemented Billy the Kid's legend was his escape from Lincoln County Courthouse on April 28, 1881, after his capture at Stinking Springs by Pat Garrett. Following his capture, Billy's trial was set for April 13, 1881 in Mesilla, New Mexico, where he was tried at the Doña Ana courthouse. There's no question that the trial was rigged from the start. Judge Warren Bristol, a known member of the corrupt Santa Fe ring, hated the kid, and he had no intentions of letting him walk free. Billy had actually struck a deal with Governor Wallace a year earlier in exchange for his testimony before a grand jury regarding the murder of Houston Chapman. Wallace had promised him a pardon. Chapman's Susan McSween's lawyer, Chapman, had been killed in a drunken fiasco by Jimmy Dolan and Billy Campbell, shortly after Billy and his allies had attempted to broker a peace deal with Dolan's men in Lincoln. Knowing tensions were high, both groups met on opposite sides of an adobe wall to avoid violence, but Jesse Evans immediately threatened to kill the kid. And the kid told him, "Anytime. Take your best shot." If not for the wall between them, the meeting could have turned into a shootout. Eventually, a truce was agreed upon, and the men celebrated by going bar hopping. Billy Campbell and Jimmy Dolan became drunk and reckless, while the kid, who wasn't known to drink much, remained at least reasonably sober. As Chapman walked the streets of Lincoln that night, Campbell confronted him and taunted him, firing at his feet, demanding that he dance. When Chapman refused, Campbell shot him. Dolan fired the second shot, finishing him off. Billy's testimony led to indictments against Campbell and Dolan, but Campbell fled to Texas, and nothing ever came of the case against Dolan. Governor Wallace, despite his promise, left town and abandoned the deal, while District Attorney William Reinerson refused to honor it. That betrayal sealed Billy's fate. By the time he stood trial in Mesilla, the court was determined to see him hang. Judge Bristol misled the jury, which consisted of entirely Hispanic men who spoke little English, basically instructing them that if Billy was in the county at the time of Sheriff Brady's murder, he was guilty. But to sentence Billy to death, they needed a first-degree murder conviction, which required proof that the killing was premeditated. The murder of Buckshot Roberts was dismissed on jurisdictional grounds, so the focus remained on Sheriff William Brady's death. Since 6 shooters had been involved, it was nearly impossible to prove who delivered the fatal shot, let alone that it had been premeditated. A second-degree murder charge would have been more reasonable, but that wouldn't have resulted in a hanging sentence. Judge Bristol's false instructions ensured Billy was convicted on first-degree murder. After his sentencing, he was transported to Lincoln, where he was to be hanged on May 13, 1881. The final insult was the men assigned to guard him, Bob Ollinger and John Kinney. Kinney was a known outlaw and killer, and Ollinger was a back shooter who even Pat Garrett admitted he never trusted. Whether it was intentional or not, forcing Billy to be guarded by men who were worse criminals than himself was a clear slap in the face. It was well known that Ollinger and Billy hated one another. Bob had shot Billy's friend John Jones in the back, and Billy had sworn revenge. And really, Billy was blamed for being the one to kill Robert Beckwith, one of Ollinger's good friends during the 5-day battle in Lincoln. During the long ride to Lincoln from Mesilla, Ollinger taunted Billy repeatedly, threatening him many times with his Whitney shotgun. In one book I read, I think it may have been Ron Hansen's book, The Kid, or it's possible that it was The Saga of Billy the Kid by Walter Noble Burns. The author writes about an incident that took place while Billy was held in the courthouse. Ollinger laid his pistol on the floor and then kicked it over toward the kid, saying, "I hear you're so fast you could fan 4 shots into me before I get this Whitney cocked." Billy, looking at him coolly, simply kicked the gun back. Ollinger chuckled and said, "Scared, huh?" Which I'm quite certain didn't sit well with the kid. But before getting to the story of Billy's trial and escape, here's another instance of the kid's daring. This came after his capture at Stinking Springs. The posse took their prisoners to Fort Sumner, and while they were eating inside, they left Jim East, one of the posse members, outside to guard them in a small building. Billy and Dave Rudabaugh were shackled together, and because it was cold, they started a fire in the fireplace to keep warm. As they stood warming themselves, Billy called out to East, "Hey, do you have any tobacco?" East pulled out his tobacco pouch and was about to throw it to Billy, but the kid smirked and said, "I'll come get it," and then started walking toward East, still chained to Rudabaugh. Halfway across the room, it suddenly dawned on East that this could be a trap, and his instincts kicked in, and he quickly pulled his 6-gun, cocked it, and ordered Billy to stop right there. Rather than argue, East tossed the tobacco the rest of the way. Billy looked at it for a moment, then tossed it back and shuffled back to the fire, grinning. This was yet another perfect example of the kid's daring and ingenuity, always testing the nerves of those around them, always trying to get them to underestimate him, always one step ahead, even in captivity. On April 28, 1881, with his execution just 2 weeks away, Billy saw his chance. Pat Garrett had left town to White Oaks to collect lumber for the gallows, leaving him under the watch of James Bell and Bob Ollinger. In his book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, Pat Garrett writes that he had warned them not to be taken in by the kid's charm and to keep someone watching him at all times, saying if they allowed him the use of one hand or gave him one moment that they weren't watching, he would devise a plan and kill the whole lot of them before they even knew he had such a plan. Historians generally agree that Bell escorted Billy to the outhouse, and on the way back up the courthouse stairs, the kid made his moves. Accounts suggest he hurried up the stairs, rounded the corner, slipping one wrist free from his shackles, and then struck Bell over the head with the cuffs, wounding him badly. In the scuffle, Billy seized Bell's revolver and told him he didn't want to shoot him. He called out to him to surrender so he could lock him in the armory, but Bell panicked and ran, forcing Billy to shoot. Bell stumbled down the stairs, staggered out the back door, and collapsed dead. His fall was witnessed by Godfrey Gauss, a local gardener, who had originally been John Tunstall's cook while Billy was working for him. Billy then hopped down the hall, still partially shackled, forced open the armory door, retrieved Bob Ollinger's shotgun, a double-barreled 10-gauge Whitney. Now armed, Billy made his way back to his holding room and waited. He knew that Ollinger, hearing the shot, would come back across the street where he had taken some other prisoners for dinner. Billy pushed the window open slowly and waited. Every time I get to this part of the story, I imagine the great historian Robert Utley as he described it. Ollinger sitting there, eating in the restaurant, and upon hearing the shot, he lifts his head and listens. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Was that a shot? And the sinking feeling he must have had in the pit of his stomach. According to legend, as Ollinger stepped off the street and Godfrey Gauss met him at the gate, saying that the kid had killed Bell, Billy's voice rang out from above, "Hello, Bob." Though many historians question whether this said those words, I personally believe it is very likely that he did, because that was the type of thing that people would have done at that time, of animation, of daring, and of bold moves. Before Ollinger could even react, Billy unleashed a blast of buckshot into his face and shoulder, killing him instantly. The kid, then going out onto the porch, broke in half the shotgun, according to some accounts, and threw the broken weapon down to Ollinger's body, saying, "There, old fellow, you won't be bothering me with that again." Now completely free inside the courthouse, Billy ordered Godfrey Gauss to bring him a pickaxe, which he used to break off his remaining shackles. He then stepped onto the balcony where the crowd had gathered and held court with the townspeople. He declared that he hadn't wanted to kill Bell, but that he was glad he had sent Pecos Bob Ollinger to hell. He spoke out in this fashion: "It's me, Pat, against the world. I don't want to hurt anyone else, but I will. It's my life at stake if they get in my way. I have not heretofore thought myself a bad man, but I guess I will show the world what a bad man is." I think this in itself helps us see how Billy wasn't really the hardened criminal, or at least not in the way most criminals were at that time, because after his escape of the courthouse, he killed no one, he robbed nobody. And we know of, and even though he said he would show the world what a bad man was, he never acted on it. Gauss unsaddled the horse for him, and Billy made his way down to the street. As he mounted, the horse spooked and bucked him off. The townspeople held their breath as the legendary outlaw hit the dirt, but Billy quickly dusted himself off and grinned, and had someone go catch his horse and bring it to him. This time he mounted without incident, and as he rode out of Lincoln whistling, his place in history was sealed. When the Kid rode out of Lincoln on April 28, 1881, he crossed from becoming a mortal man into becoming a mythical legend. We still struggle to know the truth about his life. He was an unlikely hero, but we identify with him, the underdog fighting alone against terrible odds. Against the law, yes, but a very corrupt, murderous law. A law far worse, responsible for many more deaths than the Kid. There were roughly 200 men and 80 murders committed during and before the Lincoln County War, yet the Kid was the only one ever even attempted to be held accountable. The historian Paul Hooton once said the Kid was too famous, he had to die. He thumbed his nose at the corrupt Santa Fe Ring, a highly connected group of government crooks. But the key to his fame lay in his personality. He was intelligent, quick-witted, and funny. He was good with a gun in a pinch, a great dancer, and a kind, caring friend. He was orphaned young and grew up in a hard land among hard men, always searching for a family. And when the law wouldn't punish those who killed his friends, the only family he had, he took it upon himself to deliver his own brand of justice. The haughty politicians in Santa Fe didn't appreciate his help, and ultimately he paid the price. The Kid had a good sense of humor, laughed constantly, and never dwelled on the past. He was always looking to the future. He was loyal and defended his friends with a viciousness Pat Garrett later wrote about. Quote, "A person must look into his eyes for an exhibition of anger. Filled with cold hatred, his eyes glistened and danced, but his lips were always turned up in a smile. It was hard to believe that those dancing cold eyes and that laughing face were controlled by the same spirit." There were two instances that Pat Garrett mentioned in his book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, that demonstrate his reputation already while he was alive. And one was they were riding toward Las Vegas, Nevada, during the time he was hunting the Kid before his capture at Stinking Springs, and he ran into some Hispanic lawmen who talked about how they would catch the Kid. And Garrett said he told them, "You boys would ride 2 days hard riding if you even found in the opposite direction. You guys would ride 2 days of hard riding in the opposite direction if you even found a cold camp of the Kids." And another one was when they went into a small town, Hispanic town, and he was looking for possemen to ride with them. He couldn't get a single one to go. He said the only way they would ride is if he went in the opposite direction of where they thought the Kid might possibly be. So, was Billy the Kid ordinary? No. Billy the Kid was not ordinary. I like to think of him as the great historian Frederick Nolan once described him in an interview. He was a kid, yes, but the kind of kid you would want for your own son. Billy the Kid was not average or ordinary. He was a legend that deserves to be remembered. Author J.D. Miller, written on June 22, 2024, edited and revised on February 6, 2025.